Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's discussion on crypto regulation, organized as part of India Law Forum and LITFest, currently underway. Whatever direction cryptocurrency takes in the future, it is not going away. It needs to be addressed, and regulation seems to be a suitable choice. But the question remains how and what legal implications will it have? This and much more. Today's panel delves into several such issues in order to seek answers. Let me have the pleasure of introducing today's very eminent panel. Baroness Sandeep Verma, member, House of Lords, United Kingdom, and a SKOCH Challenger awardee. She belongs to the Conservative Party and chairs the EU Goods Subcommittee. She was opposition whip from 2006 to 2010, and then government whip following the 2010 general election. Dr. Amar Patnaik, Member of Parliament Rajya Sabha from Odisha, and also SKOCH Challenger awardee. He earlier had a long career in civil services and is a former CAG official. He was also associated with United Nations and the World Bank for global external audit assignments and was also team leader of India's external audit mission to many countries. Dr. Gulshan Rai, Distinguished Fellow, SKOCH Development Foundation and former National Cybersecurity Coordinator and a SKOCH Challenger awardee with over 30 years of experience in information technology, including e-governance. He drafted the national policies on cyber laws and cyber security. As executive director of EarnIt India, he set up the first large-scale education and research network. Mr. Matthew Kimber, lawyer, Law Commission of England and Wales, also the lead lawyer for the Digital Assets Law Reform Project. Previously, he was senior associate in the restructuring and insolvency department at Allen & Overy. Mr. Vaibhav Parekh, partner and head, US office, Nishit Desai Associates. He has played a role in of key advisor of having to lead cryptocurrency exchanges in India and continues to do so. He has also been advising several leading Indian e-commerce companies in their operations from a legal and regulatory standpoint and has facilitated some of India's largest e-commerce transactions. And our moderator for today's show, Mr. Pranay Lekhi, legal advisor, international arbitration, Allen & Overy from United Kingdom. He has been one of the youngest members of the drafting committee of the Law Commission of India and a part of the expert subcommittee analyzing India's 2015 draft model bilateral investment treaty. And Mr. Utkarsh Sinha, managing director, Bexley Advisors, a boutique investment bank focused on the technology, media, and MSME sectors. He's also the VC anchor for iSpert, member of IMC Startup Committee, and the former convener of IAMAI's FinTech Committee. Before I hand over to Pranay, let me have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Samir Kochhar, author and chairman SKOCH Group, for his opening comments. Samir.
Thank you very much, Gulshan. This is indeed the warmest virtual panel ever for me because I've got so many of my dear friends on it, and people like Sandeep Verma who I haven't seen in a bit because of COVID. Amar, of course, we are carrying on meeting Dr. Gulshan Rai, who's been a friend, philosopher, and guide. Pranay, who's helped, he's worked so hard to put together this panel. Rohan, of course, my son, and Gulshan. So, I am known for my blunt speak. So I am going to, in 3 slides, tell you where I stand on crypto, because a lot of issues are being discussed in the law forum. I may not have been directly involved, but crypto is one area where I have been a bit hands-on. So most of you may know that, we were one of the strongest opposers to crypto in India. Possibly in the private sector, we were the only ones speaking up against it. Practically everybody else was, so to say, on the gravy train. We were not. And so somebody had to, call things out. And why were we against crypto? The reasons are very simple. We've been working on financial inclusion and financial literacy through 30 years of SKOCH, and we believe that small investors needed protection. There was an alarming number of investors in crypto from small towns. where typically the financial literacy is very low. So I don't think that they were even understanding what is it that they were investing in. They were putting in a lot of money. To compound all this, the industry was actually giving full page advertisements claiming how many million people of ticket size of 1,500 and so on and so forth have already got onto the bandwagon. I think their perspective at that point in time was it's too late to do anything about it because everybody's invested in crypto. But the result was actually quite the opposite. It kind of, alarmed everybody into action. There was also misinformation peddling. Blockchain and crypto were hopelessly interlinked. Our parliamentarians were briefed that without crypto, blockchain would not work. You can't have smart contracts. You cannot have community ownership. If this was US of A, most lobbies will get banned. Unfortunately, lobbying in India is not regulated. So, you got these slick, glib guys who've started these new lobbying companies. Some of them have the law background, most of them are not. But their specialization is misinformation peddling. Not only do they peddle misinformation, they're very blaze about policy influencing. So you would have somebody who's heading an association tweeting or even putting on social media that he's sitting in RBI writing cryptocurrency policy for India. The next day he would be sitting in SEBI. And you have this television channel which is 24/7 crypto. And they would give a blow-by-blow account on what was happening on tier 2 diplomacy, if you please, on crypto. So as if crypto was a sovereign nation and cabinet ministers of India were sitting with CEOs of crypto companies every day and having Shikhar Vartas, summits, and which was a tier 2 diplomacy. And they were having somehow a mysterious inroad into a blow-by-blow account of what was being discussed in such meetings. On the other hand, India itself has not, been too transparent in policy making. Policy making was very opaque. I really wonder who gave them audience and who gave them inroads and who gave them so much of access within the government. So for all these reasons, we felt that the regulatory environment, the policy environment may be hijacked to the detriment of the poor of India. And that was the reason why we opposed crypto, and very strongly so. And we were the only ones. The result of this was that PM himself took a stand and he cautioned against crypto. There's this famous meeting he had where all the officers were there, and he actually read out the Riot Act. And he told the officers famously that you do not understand what this is. And suddenly everybody did a U-turn. In the winter session, the crypto session bill was to be passed. It just went into cold storage, and now we have to rework on it. Then everybody realized that they've been taken by a solid ride by these lobbyists and influencers. So they were feeling very peeved. So I think it's an act of peeve that punitive taxation has been imposed. Some of it is even bad in law. I mean, I would say the industry had it coming, but this is a complete swing, from one extreme, from allowing yourself to be captured to, doing a 180-degree turn and say, "Hum jeene bhi nahi denge aapko. Even if you sneeze, we will tax you." I think, but unfortunately, that was the result. 25% value drop due to frantic dumping of crypto, small investors exiting in large numbers. So if you look at this result, now things have changed. And the investor protection issue is no longer there, because I think because of whatever happened and all the noise we created and whatever the Prime Minister did, I think everybody and his brother knows actual risk factors associated with crypto. So whoever is left in the market is a well-informed investor. Now, is there something wrong with it, right with it, that this panel will discuss? However, the collateral damage that happened because of all this is that while the small guys exited, even the big guys, HNIs, are transferring assets to wallets outside India. India may miss out on what I call perceived value assets. When we started, we had land, gold, etc. Then we had shares, we had debentures, then we have futures, and we have derivatives. So, globally, the trend is from real assets, you're moving towards perceived value assets, whether it's art, whether it's derivatives, whether it's stocks and shares, whether it's even gold. There is an entire class of assets that's perceived value. And I don't think that there should be any differential treatment between one perceived value asset and the other. So this is the whole value chain we might miss out on, specifically in line of $1 trillion digital economy that the Honorable Prime Minister talks about. And obviously, there is also going to be an impact on technology development and deployment. So this is the collateral damage that has already happened. We have to see what is it that can be done about it. Why nothing is being still done about it is because of a residual pushback. There is still a feeling with the regulators, with the government, that crypto will support money laundering, it can help terror financing, and it impacts fiscal stability. I actually disagree with quite a bit of this. I think money laundering needs systemic reform and global action. Crypto being there or not being there has no relevance. One of the biggest actions that happened to extinguish money laundering or black money in India was demonetization. What happened? It still thrives and survives. Monetary policy and fiscal risk is far too exaggerated because too little of the Indian economy is on crypto currently. And even if it was to become a threat, it was actually to become, let's say, a currency. Then how does RBI handle rupee stability? It handles by buying and selling dollars. So if crypto actually becomes a de facto currency, why would RBI not buy and sell crypto to handle the rupee stability? Currently, I think it's too small a matter. I think RBI has a bigger issue in handling fake currency than it would ever have on crypto. And then what happens when CBDC is convertible or even rupee is convertible? And there are some other countries where the fiat currency is digital or crypto is legal, and you convert it into rupees very easily. So then what happens then? And I feel personally that since all of this needs a lot of discussion and deliberation, I don't think anywhere in the world there is a clarity on it. What we really need to do is a use case based regulation and taxation instead of a separate policy. But then this is my personal view. Of course, my panelists may differ on that. What is the course of action? The course of action essentially is more deliberations and deep dive discussions. These have to be multilateral within the country. They cannot be opaque. Civil society, think tanks have to be involved. Everybody cannot be a paid mouthpiece. And actually, the industry will be very well advised to stay away from lobbyists and people who are very visibly being paid to sing their song. These discussions have to be at a global level because it's a global problem. So this is, I think, possibly for the first time in the private sector, somebody's got two governments together, the UK stakeholders from UK and India who are discussing this. And I think more and more needs to be done. Till such time this clarity is there, I think the best course of action rather than doing the punitive taxation is to regulate or tax by use cases in the interim. So if it's being used as an asset, tax it and regulate it like an asset. If it's being used as a currency, regulate and tax it as a currency, and whatever other ways are possible. So in light of these, the panel discusses three major issues. Should crypto be banned or accepted? While everyone thinks it's a fait accompli that it cannot be banned or it will not be banned, but when I talk to a lot of people, there are some people who are still advocating bans. So I said, why don't we just bring the elephant in the room out in the open and talk about this? How should it be regulated and classified? And should CBDC and private cryptocurrency coexist? These are the issues that we're looking at. And very ably, we will have Pranay Lekhi moderating it. Over to you, Pranay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kocher. I think you have set up the foundation for this discussion absolutely perfectly. Distributed ledgers are not new in the world, but never have they been more in the spotlight in modern times. Whatever one makes of crypto assets, they have very clearly enshrined themselves in the minds of bankers, financial regulators, governments, and consumers around the world. However, this comes with a limited understanding, especially in India, as Mr. Kocher was mentioning, about what crypto assets really are and what is the best mechanism to regulate them. And India especially faces a conundrum where they have heavily invested in creating a digital economy where you have the trio of Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile access on one end across socioeconomic segments, but at the same time, you have these regulatory concerns with crypto. And in fact, it was the Reserve Bank of India's stand in the Supreme Court proceedings that India is especially unique in its regulatory environment because of it being in a geopolitical status of being susceptible to cross-border terrorism and money laundering. So in this setting, really, I will ask this illustrious panel today uh, to explore the nature of crypto assets and cryptocurrencies specifically, and understand whether the perceived threats of crypto are such that they are insurmountable to regulation, or whether it requires a complete ban, as has been suggested across various iterations of the draft legislation in India. And I'll ask the first question to Baroness Verma. Baroness Verma, in 2015, the Financial Action Task Force, in its report on emerging terrorist financing risks, identified virtual currencies as a specific risk for terrorist financing and criminal financing, and reiterated this concern in their 2021 guidance. But they come in the backdrop of the admitted benefits that cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technologies generally have in the efficient management of payments, among other things. From the perspective of regulation, do you view cryptocurrencies as more of a risk or an opportunity for states and governments to exploit?
Thanks very much, Pranav. And in fact, I must also agree with you that Samir laid out very clearly some of the challenges. Yes, there are opportunities, but actually we do really need to unpick the challenges. And whilst cryptocurrency is talked about a lot, I think the wider understanding of cryptocurrency still remains quite opaque in the minds of many people. And therefore, two issues that come to my mind straight away. One is, does this currency again create a wider, bigger imbalance on global economies, where those that are able to utilize it in a much more effective, efficient way, whether it's better legislated or not, and those countries that still struggle with the sort of governance compliance issues on just regular currency. So I think it really does, for my mind, raise a huge number of unasked questions, because when we're seeing into the lens of one economy at a time, of course, each individual economy can make choices. But if you're going to sit it as part of the global marketplace, then we do face challenges. And those challenges are actually quite frightening if you're going to start then looking at what is it going to finance? How do we look through and follow up where we feel there are discrepancies? So you mentioned terrorism, and the funding of terrorists. Again, we don't have clear global recognition treaties or legislations that we've all signed up to around this space. So I think there's a lot more work to be done around addressing some of the unintended consequences of a cryptocurrency that actually is so volatile much of the time that, and until we all come to share that there needs to be some regular international agreements around it, I think it does face, in my view, and it is a personal view, it isn't a UK government view, but although I know the UK government itself hasn't recognized cryptocurrency as something that you can trade in, it's something you can buy and sell, but it's seen as an asset that you should pay taxes on. So I think for me, we're a long way away from just generally accepting the fact cryptocurrency is there, until we have a greater understanding and an international and collaborative process of how the banking world is going to deal with this.
Thank you very much, Baroness Verma. And just to bring that discussion of unintended consequences closer to home, Dr. Patnaik, in India, we have seen a patchwork of regulations on digital assets generally. In 2018, the Reserve Bank came with its infamous circular giving a shadow ban to virtual currencies, which was eventually, obviously, completely rejected by the Supreme Court. We have also had iterations of attempts at legislative management between 2018 and now 2021. Yesterday, the finance minister said in an interaction that crypto regulation will be on the basis of a considered view and it should not be rushed. So India still seems a way away for having a specific regulation for cryptocurrencies. What are the challenges, in your opinion, that lawmakers uniquely face while regulating virtual currencies that is not present elsewhere? And how does India respond to this?
See, brother, I think the finance minister has already gone all over the place, IMF and the World Bank, saying about the dangers of, the cryptocurrencies in terms of what we discussed, terrorism, money laundering, etc., etc. But my interactions, like as a member of the Standing Committee on Finance, we have had one round of discussions with all the stakeholders, including the exchanges and government officials. We also had an interaction with the Reserve Bank of India, who are steadfastly, even till now, supporting the idea of banning private cryptocurrencies. They are, however, well on their path to have the CBDC. So first thing I think the government of India has in mind is to have the CBDC to see how it, a government-backed, government-run, sovereign, fundamental value already there with the currency. So they want to see how it plays out. So my reading is that the first thing that the government is going to do is this, which is the certainty, I thought. But getting into the private cryptocurrency, I think the most important constraint, which I feel, which is not really coming out either of the bureaucracy or of the legislators, is because of the lack of regulatory capacity. Even if you want to enforce a ban, even if you bring in a regulation to ban it, can you enforce the ban? Even if you allow some kind of exchanges to take place, are you having the capacity, that is the Reserve Bank of India, or the SEBI, if it is to be treated as a security, do they have the regulatory capacity? And when I asked this question in Parliament straight away to the finance minister, she did agree that this was one big concern. And therefore, I think that's something that we have to work on, which I think many countries will have to do. But third, which is very important, is the Indian experience, which is very unique. And that is what we have seen with the chit funds. When we had this chit fund companies selling, various instruments at exorbitant rates of interest to the investors, and who happily picked it up, it was mostly the poor people in the villages, in the rural areas, in the tier 3 cities, and downward. And when there was default, then again it is these people who came back to governments who had no role to play, encouraging them to invest in chit funds to bail them out. And so it became political, it has taken political overturn in most of the states where chit funds scams have surfaced. And let's say in Orissa, for example, we had to set up a 300 crore corpus to give money to these people who have lost in the chit funds. Now that's actually unfair, because it is taxpayers' money, and nobody told these small investors to invest in chit funds. So the similar situation, I think, would play out in case of the crypto regulation. And that is why the governments of the day are a little skeptical about getting fully into it and rush into it. But if you do not, you may not rush into it, but you have to do it pretty fast, because if you look at the crypto market's growth in the last 1 year itself in India, it has grown about 6 times, from about $1,000 million to $6.6 billion in 2020. Of course, it has come down because of the 30% capital gains tax that was imposed in the last budget. So I think these are the concerns, these are the challenges. One is that of how to go about it. What would be the classification thing that Samir Pocher talked about? How do you treat it? Whether to treat it as a token, just for the purpose of some transactions, or to treat it as security, or to treat it as an asset class. I think that kind of clarity is also, there is no unanimity on that front. And the last important thing is this thing which has come up, which was not there earlier. I've spoken about blockchain, distributed ledger many times over about 7 years ago. And now the lobbyists, rather, they come and say that you can't operate the blockchain unless you use cryptocurrencies. But I understand that the cryptocurrencies are just one of the use cases of blockchain. Blockchain can have many other applications. So I think it is all these things which has deterred the government of India from taking a concrete decision on regulating private cryptocurrencies. But I'm very certain that the RBI will come with a CBDC, which would actually, in my opinion, be good, because that would actually act like a regulatory sandbox to see how it plays out. And then maybe they would get into the private cryptocurrency. But, we have very little time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patnaik. I think there's a lot to unpack in what you've said. Dr. Rai, taking this discussion of regulation forward in a context where Dr. Patnaik has mentioned that the CBDC coming in is an eventuality, and the pace of regulation needs to keep up with advancements around the world. We've seen that regulation of crypto assets has been more reactionary, following the use of the assets as either investments or means of exchange or means of trade. So as Mr. Kochhar was mentioning in his opening comments, do you believe that regulation of crypto assets must be as reactionary? So we first see what consumers are using them as, and then regulate it once that use has been established? And how do you view the global developments of policy being reactionary in the context of India?
Thank you very much. First of all, inviting me and giving me opportunity. And I'm quite happy. I'm grateful. And I feel very delighted to share the platform with our Honorable Member of Parliament, Dr. Amar Patnaik, such a legend whose clarity is very, very good. I always look for hearing him. And when I heard another Honorable MP of the Britain, I was too happy. So it's a pleasure to be on a rise with them. Now, the subject of crypto, what I see it, you see, I have a slightly different background than the other two previous honorable members, the honorable speakers there. My background is basically from the techno background. Of course, I dealt into the law. I did my law. And then I dealt into security. So when I see the issue of crypto and look at the regulations there, at times I get perplexed there. What kind of a thing you want to do that? The crypto is a small set. If all of you, you agree with me, it's a small set of a Web 3.0, which is a buzzword going around this. And Web 3.0 is nothing but a distributed kind of internet kind of a structure, architecture, and crypto is a part of that kind of a system there. Now, this subject has three aspects. One, the aspect is the technology, because we are dealing with a different kind of architecture. Why I'm saying so? The world regulation depends upon all the systems there. So one aspect is the technology. One must understand the technology. How does the technology function there, and what direction technology is going on? And this technology, basically underlying technology, is a blockchain. So most of the time we confuse blockchain and crypto, the two different kind of a thing. But underlying technology of a crypto is a blockchain kind of a thing, where blockchain is a factor which talks about authorization and the authentication. These are the main features of the blockchain which it comes there. And apart from the internet kind of a system there. The second part which comes up is the framework. When you talk about the legal framework, regulation aspects, you look at it, because the regulation, whatever we try to control, money laundering or terror financing or buying as a dark net, all kind of a thing, we talk about it, all the fintech kind of a thing, the CBDC, we talk about it, good or bad, whatever we talk about it. These are all required. It has a different legal implication there. Terror financing has the angle of the terror and the law and order issue comes up. The CBDC is a real issue of the financial regulation, where the currency regulation, sovereign regulation comes up. Then how do you set up the company, distributed company? It has a legal other implications also. So while you look at the crypto, it looks to be a very small word there. But look at the technology aspect, legal aspect, different discipline aspect there. These are a different complex set of the things there. So when we talk about it, in a way, we are talking about convergence of technologies. We're talking about convergence of the legal issue. There are multiple legal issues are there. I explained that. You have where the different organs of any government is involved, where the home ministries, finance ministry, technical ministry, communication ministry, all kind of issues are involved is one word crypto. But then you can realize how the regulation becomes very, very complex there, because you had to merge. We have been dealing with separately this subject, not in India, all throughout the world, and we look at it. Then comes the geopolitical angle there. What angle is today is emerging more there? See, apart from whatever is the world, we all know about it, the terror financing or all kind of money laundering, all kind of a thing you do. But the issue of Ukraine, and you should look at the Ukraine and Russia, whatever conflicts are going on, war is going on. There is another angle which has emerged there. The angle is the dollarization. Today, crypto trade is a dollar trade. Nobody deals with euro or the pound or the yen or the won or in the rupee there. There is an aspect of dollarization also emerged there. All stable coin is coming in now dollar there. That's another angle has emerged, and it has become a very, very important issue there. And this issue becomes important, particularly when you come to CBDC. Are you going to dollarization, or what are you going to do that? Ultimately, these issues have become important there. So the issue of regulation has aspect of technology plus other legal framework, the usage framework. It's not so easy because we have not dealt with it. If I go back 20 years ago, social media emerged. Today, we still have not found a kind of address the challenge, a proper regulation to address social media. My honorable member of the parliament, remember when I wrote the IT Act, I had to face a lot of flack there. A lot of flacks I had to face. It was a challenge, blocking this kind of thing, hate speech. If you look at the Digital Act, which has come by the Europe, the two acts have come up there, digital market and digital platform. The two acts have come up there. Or other acts they have come up. They are addressing the same issue of the trade, same issue of the hate in a digital kind of a thing, two different. How much time they have taken? 20 years they have taken to come out with the act to address that hate particular angle there. And this is all because of technology there. So issue is not so simple, I must say that. Issue is not so simple. It's a geopolitical aspects are becoming equally complex along with the technology and other legal issue which we country have there. So I feel that we need to look at the structure in a systematic manner. If I have to suggest, we must deal it in a structured manner. Don't look at the crypto itself. I agree with Samir said it, that we need a whole lot of think tanks, whole lot of discussion to start with. Create a structure because they're all linked together. We are talking about convergence now. Everything convergence of process, convergence of technology, convergence of law, everything is coming built up over there. So we need a careful thinking and careful planning. CBDC, it's a well-stand government has announced in the parliament also that we will have a CBDC, which Dr. Patnaik also said, yes, fine. We look at the crypto market separately and still we are not decided. We are not sure. The more we get sure about it, okay, we define it as a security, we define it as a token, and the next time some different argument comes to technology. So these are technology-led items are there. We need more research, more study. And I can tell you with my experience, though the country like Singapore or country like Korea or in UK also some sort of a regulation has come up. Middle East has come up. The UAE has come up with certain regulation there. But I think it requires more work. They're all incompatible. they cannot address the challenges of technology which it comes there. I simply ask questions there. How will you handle peer-to-peer? This is the technology which allows peer-to-peer kind of a transaction. Whether you do the any kind of thing, it allows peer-to-peer. It's becoming very, very difficult, very, very difficult there. More work, more system is there. But the goal should be very clear. We cannot leave any kind of a confusion. We need a clarity in the regulation. Whatever we do, we need a clarity in the regulation. CBDC issues are it's very complex issues are there, and sometime when the Samir arranges another kind of a thing, I will spell out what are the regular challenges of the CBDC. It's not so simple. CBDC saying so simple, it's not so simple there. So I think challenges are huge. First, I would like someone should list down the technological impact, look into technology, what kind of a regulation, which direction we need to it, and then how do we handle those kind of a challenges. That the third step, it need to be done structurally. They're all in line to be compatible there. It's a great challenge. I don't think it's going to be so easy. I agree with Dr. Patnaik. It's not going to be so easy, but it is a time is a factor. Technology is changing very fast. We need to do that. Much more rigorous work need to be done. It has to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai. Mr. Parekh, just taking this discussion of regulation a bit forward, Dr. Rai spoke about the dollarization of cryptocurrencies, and he also spoke about the regulatory challenges that have come as a consequence of crypto assets being so entrenched in geopolitical situations. It seems rather ironic that currency that was originally envisioned to be formulated to be precisely out of the monetary system and supply setup has become so ingrained in every discussion on regulation of it. So the question is, do you think that there is scope for crypto assets existing without state sanction? Or do you believe that regulation of crypto assets is the way that they will become and come into the mainstream?
It's a very good question. I believe that regulation of a crypto is going to happen everywhere in the world. I think it is just a question of people not realizing how they should be regulating it. So not just in India, this question on regulation is everywhere, including in US. As new things come up, like for example, stable coins, right? The US Tether, USDT, and all the other coins which are coming back to a dollar, right? There have been a lot of discussion here that needs to be regulated because they are basically acting like a bank. And as a result, they should be regulated. Regulations are going to evolve in all parts of the country. So regulation is, in my mind, is inevitable. It's unlike that countries will not regulate it. The way I'm looking at it, the crypto has already come from fringes to mainstream. It is not going to be because of the government is going to regulate or not regulate. It is because the institutions are accepting it. So now, if you see the Goldman Sachs or the JP Morgans or the institutions which have largely been off crypto for many years have started making noise of coming up with cryptocurrency products, right? Whether it's Stripes or other, they all are getting into cryptocurrency. So it is going to come in the mainstream, or rather, I would say it's already in the mainstream. So it's just a question that it will be regulated at some point in time. I just had one point. I was agreeing to whatever all the audio, the earlier speaker says, including Samir, but they made a very good point, right? That there is a problem on how to regulate. And one of the things which we have been advising cryptocurrencies, I have personally been advising cryptocurrencies 2013. We were actually lawyers to IMAI when the Supreme Court case happened. We kind of acted for them for against the virtual shadow ban which RBI had put in through the particular legislation. We have been also meeting the committees which were there. And we always been saying one thing, that, this technology is so new, it's very difficult to come up with a regulation immediately without realizing the full aspects of it, right? Till you come out with regulation, what you should allow or enable is self-regulation. And this has worked very well in other areas like advertising and some of the media content related things. And you should try it out here. This is where, at least in my view, people will create better regulation because they know what are the issues which are there. And when I say people, I mean to say the currency exchanges or the cryptocurrency exchanges or other institutions which are actually working to create the economy, the guys who are actually coming in front pages and stuff like that, right? If they are regulated better, either with self-regulation or with government regulation, if government is not ready with self-regulation, then you will see the investor protection case or any other case will be much, it will be much better. In fact, if you see in India, we have been advising companies saying that you should never take cash for cryptocurrencies and you should always do a KYC. Cryptocurrencies where you people do KYCs, you can track if there are any users who have misused it for money laundering purposes or for illegal purposes. This KYC aspect is very critical and in my view, something which should be implemented immediately because that will solve a lot of investor problem, issue problem or regulatory problem. But with that, I will hand over to you, Pranay.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Kimber, just taking this point of the challenge of regulation forward to you as you spend a lot of your time thinking about the challenge of regulation. Globally, we've seen a very wide spectrum of regulation for crypto assets. We have seen states like El Salvador and Liechtenstein that allow the use of crypto assets as legal tender, but then we also have states like China that have complete bans. The approaches differ from using existing legislation, making amendments to existing legislation, and creating new standalone legislations. I believe in the UK as well, the UK courts at least have identified crypto assets to fall within the traditional definition of property. So do you believe that this question of regulation is one that can be answered by existing legislative frameworks? Or is this one that would require a standalone bespoke legislation to address the unique challenges of crypto assets? I'm sorry, I believe your mic is not connected. I don't think we can hear you. I think it would be helpful if you could probably rejoin and I can take that question back to you. Just taking this discussion forward, I'll come to Mr. Sinha now. Mr. Sinha, we heard Mr. Parekh speak about the challenges that the crypto industry faced in India as a consequence of the patchwork legislation. The budget recently made an amendment to the Income Tax Act, what Mr. Kocher said, a punitive tax on digital assets of 30% and then the additional 1% TDS to be calculated on each transaction. This position is similar to that of the US in the sense that it imposes a tax without recognizing cryptocurrencies as a legal tender. The UK, on the other hand, taxes cryptocurrencies as capital assets. How do you view, one, the taxation of crypto assets in India in the face of a liquidity crunch that these exchanges might be facing? And secondly, what is your opinion on having taxability before having a regulatory regime for the crypto asset itself?
Sure. I think first of all, I'd like to say that it's very good that organizations like SKOCH are looking so keenly into this area, because one of the things, and you briefly touched upon this in your last question, is that the global regulatory landscape pertaining to crypto is so wide. You have countries like El Salvador on one end and China on the other, that a lot of regulatory experiments are happening simultaneously in terms of what works and what doesn't. And there's a significant role for policy advocates to be good students of what's happening and make sure that they're translating that in a very current and a very immediate way for the government to be able to react to what's working and what's not, and therefore evolve a regulatory landscape within India that takes from the global best. I don't think that we have come across this kind of a situation in many other things where the world, by and large, globally gets polarized in one direction very quickly. So I think there's a significant opportunity over here to get this right. In terms of your particular question about taxation before formal regulatory regime, I think in terms of the ability to do business, the fact that taxation was introduced gave some kind of certainty, but I think that carpet has been pulled very quickly after that, because of guidelines that the RBI and NPCI have issued in terms of the usage of UPI for buying crypto. So I think as far as the crypto regime in India, I think that's pretty much unsolved, and it will remain that way for a while. And I think the markets are going to evolve into a certain direction, and the government will in most likely have to be reactive to that rather than be very proactive. I think we also need to understand that why are we in this situation to start with? Why is crypto such a critical part of the discussion? And the simple answer for that is because Bitcoin shot up in value in the last 2 years. And we need to also understand what is the driver of that. I mean, if you look at Bitcoin, in fact, if you look at all crypto, all top crypto currency which are traded, the volumes for that are about $45,000 units a day, right? On a good day, it ranges anywhere from 25,000 to 45,000 units of crypto, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's others, traded in a day, which implies that there is a significant opportunity for prices to fluctuate wildly based on the preference of certain people in the market who hold a lot of it, right? So it's very important for us to disentangle this conversation from that we're having from crypto versus blockchain. Crypto, as I think a few people mentioned earlier, is simply an application that's built on blockchain. And if you think about it from a macro perspective, I do feel in terms of blockchain, we are at a place where we were when it came to the internet in the late 90s, where everything was being thrown at the wall to see what sticks, and a lot of noise was being made about that. A lot of money was being poured into it. That kind of noise is happening right now. That does not mean that the internet came and passed and it was a fad. The internet fundamentally changed a lot of what we are experiencing today, and I think a lot of the blockchain companies that emerge from this clutter on the other side will be the kind of companies that are fundamentally able to reshape how we do business globally. But we have to be cautious about not being drowned out by the noise. There is a lot of opportunity. There is a lot of some good innovation that's happening. Is definitely not at scale. Even for the applications which are talked about, whether it's global transfer of currency, whether it's about borderless currencies and all of that, we are not at a place where it is competitive to traditional means. Distributed ledgers today are not efficient, and that's simply a function of the fact that it needs more time to get efficient. We also need to recognize that we don't know if this is going to be the solution going forward. There's no reason why this is the only solution going forward. So if something else comes by or the existing systems evolve, one of the biggest things that people talk about when it comes to Bitcoin and others, anonymity, is the fact that there's no oversight. Those are things which we can take for granted as is not going to be permitted. One of the first things that if you look back historically, if the Mughals conquered India, if the Rajputs conquered a certain part of the Deccan, the first thing that they would always do was issue their own currency. So currency as fiat is something which is very critical to the existence of government. So I don't see that role going away anytime very quickly, and everybody's going to fight tooth and nail to make that happen, despite the experiments that the likes of El Salvador are doing. So a lot of the euphoria around cryptocurrency, I think, will see some kind of deflation. But what emerges on the other side will probably have some significant long-term value.
Absolutely, sir. And again, just to go for round two with Mr. Kimber, the question that we had was, do you think that the existing legislative framework globally is enough to regulate cryptocurrencies, or do you think there's a requirement for a bespoke legislation that's on a standalone basis deals with crypto assets?
Yeah, so hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes, we can. Apologies
for before. Yeah, I think that I want to answer the first part of your question quite briefly. Crypto kind of exist with or without legislation. They're not like IP rights that rely on the existence of regulation for their existence. And also, they don't need to be recognized by any form of legislation for them to exist. They exist as data objects. Now, they exist as data objects because they are kind of some form of information or data which is kind of instantiated within a wider crypto token system. And therefore, there's kind of this element of technology combined with the social element, because the technology and the system needs to have continued active use and operation by users for their continued existence. But I think the starting point, or at least the starting point from our perspective, from an English law basis, is to recognize that data objects exist almost like physical objects exist in the world. And if my phone, if a law says my phone exists or not, it's still here. And that's the same with crypto. So legislative reform or any legislative provision should recognize that point. And any bans normally are framed in different ways to recognize that point. So bans will relate to preventing people from executing operations such as mining, but that doesn't stop the things existing in themselves. Often bans are framed in terms of, or kind of legislation is framed in terms of how those data objects are actually used. But those are all different. And even with the things like El Salvador, recognizing the legal tender status of a certain crypto token that exists, a certain data object that exists, is just recognizing that for some kind of legal purposes, that data object can have certain kind of effects. And mostly that's to do with how it is treated for capital gains purposes and whether or not kind of bodies, people, shops, etc., are permitted to accept it as legal tender for the purposes of their kind of, I guess, market interactions. So I think that's a really important point to think about at the start, that these things do exist as data objects regardless of the law. That then helps legislative processes and legislative kind of interventions if they're kind of considered necessary, because you can think how those data objects which exist in the world, how are they used by people? They might be used by people in different ways, and they also might have different properties than existing objects. So they're different in some ways to physical objects, and they're also different in some ways to things like debts or the creations of legal systems. So I think that is a really important starting point from which to work forward. Treating crypto in a taxonomical way is very difficult because it doesn't recognize that underlying objectness of data objects. So that, I think that's a fundamental starting point.
Thank you very much. And I'll take that starting point to Dr. Rai. Dr. Rai, as Mr. Kim mentioned, that crypto assets would exist irrespective of any legislation or regulation because of the perceived value that the traders or consumers find in them. So their existence, in fact, is the reason why central banks are not keen or were not originally keen to accept them as part of a financial system. Today, the Reserve Bank of India, in a separate sense, also said that it was not keen to accept the Niti Aayog's proposal for additional digital banking units out of fear of fragmentation. We had similar aspects where the 2018 report of the European Union Parliament also suggested that if a ban were imposed on crypto assets, it would make it harder to detect, as the breach would mean that the identities are now obscured. In this context of crypto assets existing and a ban possibly being counterproductive, do you think that India's fears that enhanced use of private cryptocurrencies could lead to negative effects on the monetary policy are valid? And if they are valid, how do you think such fears could be allayed?
See, let me first say that. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
You see, let me say that the very fact you said the RBI has not accepted report A, report B, report C of different organizations who are the government agency, government departments are there. They are authorized government department, important government department. RBI has not accepted that. Well, as I said in my earlier presentation, that it's a kind of a distributed subject. It's an altogether new evolving subject there. And we have not understood any aspect, technology, regulation, or how to security aspect, we not understood it. See, our whole, the crux of the thing, which my view is that RBI's adamant part of that crypto is not correct. But I understand why they are doing it. Why they are doing it, I understand, but they should not do that. That's a separate issue. There are two aspects are there. They are doing it because their regulatory mechanism is involved on a real cash. Okay, the entire setup, the mechanism to handle the real cash. It took them 1935 RBI Act. They took them so many years. Now it is going to be, it's a 90 years going to be the 90 year to set up the mechanism. They don't know how to handle, restructure the mechanism. What will be the role of they can't visualize the role of RBI regulator in that because it's distributed kind of a structure. Money is lying here, money is lying there. How will they control? How will they regulate it? That is the larger worry. What will be their role? Whether their existence will be there, existence will not be there. That's, in my view, that's a larger issue. They are not able to come back. The problem is that it's true that the whole architecture of the financial regulation will change. And that's a worry with all the regulators also. But then they'll have to find a solution. If someone thinks that technology can be stopped, I think it's a myth. We cannot stop the technology innovations there. We cannot do that. Here, who will write the digital assets? If you take a rupee note or some currency note, this says, I promise to pay. Here, issue is who will pay. There is no asset down below. That's a larger issue. There are issues, larger issue. But I think RBI's adamant aspect, which is partly their worry, and it's true worry. But I think they should look more proactively, more positively, and find a solution. What should be their structure? All of us change as the time goes on. And we have to change, otherwise we'll become a fossil there. So the case with RBI. RBI has been consistently problems they are facing it there because the change is very slow. That is a larger issue. That's my view. That's a worry. That's worry. But the issue need to be resolved there. Whole issue of assets. How will we deal with the assets? How will we regulate the assets there? And how the recognition of the assets there. Ultimately, when we go to CBDC, we need to recognize other currencies also. Those assets need to be recognized by assets, either whether it's UK or USA or Russia. Those are issues there. I think RBI is thinking, I mean, if they think like this, they'll fall behind very soon. I don't think there is far away. It has to be handled. It's an area which is growing area. It will grow further area. And I mean, no one can curb it. We need to better understand and move proactively and constructively.
Thank you, Dr. Rai. Mr. Parekh, Dr. Rai mentioned the RBI and its role in great detail. In the Supreme Court proceedings, one of the key arguments that the IMAI took was that crypto assets are precisely out of the RBI's scope and remit of regulation. In a related sense, we have seen the United States use regulatory mechanics such as the CFTC and the SEC to regulate cryptocurrencies. Do you think that SEBI, which has already said that it is not capable of regulating crypto assets as they currently stand, and the IMAI's opinion of the RBI not being the correct body to regulate crypto assets, in your opinion, is a unique new regulator required for crypto assets, or are sort of exchange bodies and regulators sufficiently well equipped to deal with them?
I did say that it's beyond RBI's jurisdiction, but Supreme Court says no, RBI has a jurisdiction. So, IMAI argument failed in that category. So RBI has jurisdiction to regulate. But I think what you said is very important. I've been talking to several regulators and people who are in know on how they think it should be regulated. And I got a best answer from a Singapore regulator in MAS, where they said if it behaves like a duck, we should regulate like a duck, right? So it really depends on the behavior, and that's if you see the Supreme Court judgment. They said that this cryptocurrency has a unique situation. It will behave very differently in different situations, right? And that's the great part about this, right? So you have a cryptocurrency which behaves like a payment system, then it should be regulated by RBI as a payment system. If it behaves like a securities, just like how SEC regulates here, then say we should be regulating like a security. Now, luckily, we don't have as many ICOs in India as you see outside India, right? That's why SEBI is in a much better position than that's RBI, because RBI is seeing a lot of these issues and they are worried about the regulation. SEBI is not, because they are not seeing ICOs in India. If we are seeing a lot of token issuance in India, then SEBI also would be worried and saying, how do I regulate, right? But if they are like securities, then you should be regulated by SEBI. Then there are utility tokens, and there are various new cases which will come up. So depending on how it comes up, the regulation should come up, right? Now, there are 2-3 other things which are very critical. Samir talked about investor protection. That's very important. In my mind, the Consumer Protection Act should be revamped to already, in my view, what CPA currently is there takes care of the crypto issues, right? But because of the unique challenges, it needs to kind of add up from regulatory side. So I don't think there is one regulatory body which will be in a position to regulate all aspects. It's not just going to be possible. What is really required is to see the behavior, and each different regulatory body extend the regulation. It just requires sometimes tweak. Sometimes you need to come with a new regulation, but to kind of go and regulate the behavior of crypto rather than the crypto itself. I think that's the right way to approach.
That's very insightful, sir. And just taking the specific issues that regulators in India have said are essential to the reasoning behind banning crypto assets, I'll go to Dr. Patnaik. Dr. Patnaik, the cryptocurrency and regulation of its official digital currency bill in its most recent iteration seeks to prohibit all private cryptocurrencies in India, and as you said, establish a new CBDC. We have also, over the course of the last few years, seen the use of crypto assets in the case of Ali Shukri Amin, where there was terrorist financing involved. And then there are also cryptocurrencies like Monero and Dash that are completely anonymized. What, in your opinion, are the challenges that global economies will face due to the decentralized nature of crypto assets, which is a recognized limitation? And how do you view the national security angle for cryptocurrencies as being a linchpin for the argument for banning them?
Yeah, you see, I think the entire crux of the issue is, as Dr. Rai said, peer-to-peer is the entire technology. So Web3, it's crossing boundaries. Now, we have central banks in every geography, every country. We don't have an overall bank for the entire world. So there is, I think, an urgent need for an international order to be set up on crypto, a view which is to be taken by the G20, 23, or maybe the other organs of the United Nations, or maybe in the WTO if you take it as a tradable kind of a thing. But an international order has to be set up, because it is, you do not, the central bank of a country can regulate only things within the country, within the geography, and that is where the problem is. And so even if you have KYCs, you trace everything, but if you realize that the final cash out has taken place in another geography, and to a particular individual who is probably in the banned list of this particular country, then what you do? So the international order has to be established. I think that's the most important thing. The second thing is, I have had interactions with SEBI where we have the capacity. So I would refer to the three different vertical silos as a payment system, as a token system, as a currency, and the banning idea. If you ban it, they would still exist. We have banned gambling, but we know that it is happening. So so banning is, I think, absolutely not the solution. What the finance minister has been pushing for, what even the IMF, while talking about the risks of crypto, did talk about, is the
I think we've lost the connection to Dr. Patnaik. I'll just take the questions of the limitations
international order, and this international order.
Sorry, Dr. Patnaik, I believe we lost the connection with you for a bit.
Yeah, so I just said with the countries of the world will have to design the specific crypto regulations based on this international principles, not a rule-based kind of a thing, but a principle-based legislation as to their classification, as to their definition, as to how much of, because each one of them, though directly not affecting the money supply within the economy, which the central bank manages, will impact, because it will impact the dollars, it will impact the other currencies. So it's not just a technology issue, it is going to affect the entire financial system in the world. And we know about, Dr. Rai again talked about what's happening between Russia. There are good things as well. The sportsman who donated 1 Bitcoin as a philanthropic action on because of a disaster that hit India. But those are also things which we would be missing out. So a regulation has to be there, an international order has to be established, a principle-based order, and I think that's the way to look at it.
I will take that point to Baroness Verma as we move forward later on the point of the international regulation, because it'll be good to hear her views on it. But just on the issue of the specific limitations that have been pointed out for favoring a ban on cryptocurrencies, I'll take the question first to Mr. Kimber. Mr. Kimber, the aspects of cryptocurrencies that have been highlighted in order to justify a ban have been the volatile fluctuations in prices that we've seen over the last few months, the risks to consumers with cyber attacks and Ponzi schemes, and the risk to consumers generally, as well as the impact that crypto exchanges and the databases that are needed, the physical infrastructure, would have on the environment. In your opinion, are these sort of limitations unique to crypto assets? Or would they be found, for instance, when you're dealing with money laundering, equally in the case of fiat money? And are there ways of regulating these specific limitations, which would sort of prefer the argument as opposed to banning them outright?
So I think the first point is that if you treat data objects as objects of property rights, humans, they're effectively just a tool, they're effectively just objects. So humans can use tools in different ways, and different humans may choose to use these tools, these data objects, in different ways. Some humans will use these tools for scams. Some humans will fraudulently misrepresent what these data objects are to obtain profit, right? And then they'll run away, and then they'll try to run away. Some humans will use them for fraudulent purposes. Some humans will use them for money laundering purposes if they can and they can't be tracked. But the likelihood is that there is some serious tracking that can be done in relation to that. And some humans will use them for other kind of nefarious purposes. That is a feature of all objects. It is not necessarily an idiosyncratic feature of crypto tokens or data objects. Now, there are some idiosyncratic features of crypto tokens or data objects that might make that easier, or on the other hand, harder. And that is, those features are really around kind of anonymity or pseudo anonymity that market participants have assumed comes hand in hand with those data objects. We've seen at least over the last 2 or 3 years, that the assumed anonymity, the assumed untraceability of using crypto, it is far lower than many market participants thought. So some of the Bitcoin that was taken in the Bitfinex hack in 2016 was recently traced to market participants who had been using the proceeds of that Bitcoin 6 years later to buy a Walmart gift card, and they were arrested for money laundering. So it takes time, but it is highly possible right now, and there are sophisticated people who can trace these cryptos. So it's actually a very interesting question. Most of the bad market participants are actually hidden by, this is kind of a weird thing to say, but they're hidden by other bigger, badder market participants, right? Who are doing bigger and badder things. That is partly because this is a nascent and new technology, and the market has evolved very quickly. Over time, as law enforcement gets better, as people use this stuff more and more, it will become harder and harder to do these bad things, just by the nature of the sophistication of law enforcement, tracers, and other market participants. So a question on the other side of that is, are people happy overall in having every single transaction that they do, every single interaction of a financial or otherwise property nature online and being traceable? Or do we need to think about 10 years into the future further methods or mechanisms to enhance personal privacy in some ways? And there are kind of technological developments that are thinking about that right now, including layer 2 things like zero knowledge proofs, which allow you to kind of prove that something has occurred without actually having to give over that information. So there is a delicate balancing act. I think right now there is a huge amount of fraud. There is a huge amount of nefarious stuff. Whether the percentages are higher than kind of the cash system is a different question. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a huge amount of kind of actual bad stuff going on. It is just that overall, that has to be kind of considered in a broader context, I think, and it is easy to forget because of the headline grabbing points.
That's very helpful. Baroness Verma, just to come back to you on the point of an international agreement or policy to regulate these limitations that crypto assets face due to their inherently non-state nature. I think it is an appropriate suggestion that you made in the beginning of this discussion that there needs to be a coming together of minds on how to regulate it. At the World Economic Forum this year, Prime Minister Modi also pointed out that kinds of technologies like cryptocurrency are associated with decisions being taken by a single country not being sufficient. So how do you view these similar mindsets for regulation across borders coming together? And what shape or form do you imagine this would take?
So if I can just roll back, so I can't remember who said it, but it's about, you can't put the technologies back in the bottle. Once they're out, the technology's out. But what we haven't managed so far when new technologies come out is actually look at the longer term, unexpected sort of darker side of that technology. And the internet has demonstrated it. Twitter, all of these platforms are now demonstrating to us that there is an incredibly difficult dark side that as you become much more sophisticated, and I think, Matthew, you said it quite well, that although you become more aligned to what's going on, but the person who's going to actually find benefits of how to not let you know what they're doing also become much more sophisticated. So I get very, very nervous about saying, well, technology's out and we can't do anything about it. I think, therefore, it is really prevalent on all of us that are in the space of looking at these from a legislative, regulatory point of view, is to be able to start very early on. Now, cryptocurrency has been around for some time, but nobody really understands it. But my worry and my concern is always the majority that are wanting to go into it will be the ill-informed or the uninformed consumer who is going to be dependent on an easy win. And those easy wins are sold so brilliantly well with the way they are marketed. And I think somebody earlier mentioned that too, that, you get these people, they are persistent to get you on side to buy what they need you to buy from them. And so we do need to see that there is a real dark side to all of this that needs to be addressed really quickly. And no one country is going to manage it. And the bigger issue will be which of those countries will have the appetite to then, when they see things are being put in the name of cryptocurrency for the good, are going to be able to track it back. And everybody knows that that is incredibly difficult. The internet has demonstrated it. There are far too many places to hide. And so how do you make sure that all of those agencies that are going to have to operate to be able to regulate, to be able to observe, to be able to prosecute, how are all of those going to be actually prepared? Because this isn't an overnight thing. You can't suddenly tell the customs officers or the police or the judiciary how to cope with all of these things. So how are we going to prepare all of that? And that needs to have a common framework. So the bigger issue is, how do we make sure, first and foremost, that the end user, the consumer, and there are millions and billions of them, how are they also be able to get some real knowledge of what they're buying into?
Thank you very much, Baroness Verma. In fact, the consumer issue was one of the core arguments that has been taken by the government consistently. And taking this to Mr. Sinha, the reason why they suggest that they've banned private cryptocurrencies and only allowed for CBDCs and certain other exceptions to distributed ledger technologies is because they see these limitations as being insurmountable by regulation. And I think it harks back to the original fears that the market had about cryptocurrency, about it being so out of the system that it's more intimidating than what it has actually come to be in its various shapes and forms. There are two questions that I have from that. The first relates to whether you think the exit of private players from India by virtue of ban, what effect do you think that will have on the Indian goal of a digital economy? And the second question is, do you think that the approach of banning private players and having a centrally regulated stablecoin digital currency is something that can work? Or is there space in the market for having both a digital currency as well as private coins?
Sure. I think let's start with your second question first, which is whether the approach of banning works. I think, as I think Matthew talked about it, or somebody else did, banning does not work in general. I think that Mr. Rai talked about it. No matter what you ban, you will find avenues where you can, get access to it, whether it's gambling, whether it's anything else. And especially when it comes to a technology product, India has banned porn for a long time. I don't think that, we are in a situation where there is no porn in India. So it's not a question. I do not think that banning the product itself is going to yield the results that anybody intends for it. I think going back to Baroness Verma's point, what is happening right now, which is very detrimental to the growth of this space, is the aggressive marketing that's happening. And often without consent, people are being pulled into WhatsApp groups and asked very aggressively to trade. If you search on Google once about Bitcoin, and I do that all the time because it's part of my work. Those ads for getting you onto some platform or the other will chase you everywhere. So I think some form of regulation in the marketing of these products might be helpful, but again, I have very limited hopes when it comes to banning anything, because realistically, the people who are good will be left out, but the people who are bad actors never respond to a ban. So I doubt that bans really work. Going back to your first point on whether the exit of players is something which we should look forward to, and I think the answer is no. because the moment you are able to get the bigger players, the ones who are responsive to regulation, the ones who are responsive to consumer needs, and who are on the whole a lot more responsible than the unorganized sector who are just in it for the for the quick win. The moment you get those players out of the system, you end up creating a system which is much more akin to the Wild West. The solution is not for the sheriff to leave town, or to make them leave, to have the businesses which are good and organized leave town, and leave it for the bandits to figure it out. The one of the main things that is happening in this space is uh, that a lot of uninformed people are being driven into the market by the hype, and that is the part which is the main cause for concern. If you look at the product fundamentally, whether it is blockchain or whether it's an application of blockchain like crypto, there are use cases, there are applications. I don't think it's the hype that has gotten built into the ecosystem right now is something which benefits the small investor or the small player. So the government's focus on making sure that the interest of the small investor is protected is critical. And I think also, the government and policy makers and policy institutes such as yours have to be very thoughtful about, this is a fundamental point of inflection in how we think about money. Potentially, it is potentially a fundamental point of inflection about how we think about money. When we move from the gold standard towards fiat currency, that was a significant point of an inflection. Are we going into something which is a pegged currency once again? When you talk about CBDC, fundamentally India is already issuing digital currency like every other current country, right? So if the government issues bonds, it's not printing 1 lakh crores worth of currency notes and then circulating them in the market. It is a digitally issued currency which is going into intermediaries' accounts. Intermediaries are then distributing it into the retail hands. So whether it's retail CBDC, whether it's wholesale CBDC, the only thing that changes is that you're doing it on a blockchain, and that is something which unfortunately is not sufficiently developed right now. So are we responding to a hype? Are we doing something which is fundamentally required? I fear that we are creating solutions that don't to problems that don't exist. The fundamental problem at its core is, does cryptocurrency fundamentally have value? I think the markets are going to discover that. If you think about that Elon tweet that became an NFT, it's on Elon, Jack Dorsey tweet that became an NFT, and it sold for $2 million. It was listed for $42 million, and then it got bids for $16,000, right? So the market did decide that, hey, sorry, that was not worth it. So as long as there are reasonable players in the market, it will find its own level. If there is a hype, the hype will go down. If it is suppressed, it will come up. And I don't think that the governments can play a whole lot of a role in fastening that, in speeding that up. The only thing that the government can do is make sure that the small investors are not being hurt, and that will require a lot more than just a legislative action. It requires a lot of enforcement at the ground level, a lot of training of the local police thana. That if something happens, and how do you take it? It requires a lot of community, action and outreach. So those are things that the government has to be a lot more, I guess, proactive about than just trying to come up with a blanket ban.
This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I can see we're just about to come to time. So I'll go to Dr. Rai. Dr. Rai, we've seen over the course of this discussion, Mr. Sinha and Baroness Verma speak of the key issue of consumers being protected, the lowest common denominator in the market having some degree of assurance that they will not be duped. At the same time, we've also seen Mr. Kimber elucidate on how crypto assets will exist irrespective of whether a government comes in to regulate it or not. And we've heard Mr. Parekh speak about how regulation should actually impact the uses of cryptocurrencies. To bring this discussion full circle, do you think that the current iteration of the crypto legislation in India meets these limitations? And if it does not, how do you perceive Indian policy towards crypto assets going forward, developing to be more stakeholder friendly?
See, you have asked me a question for which I have practically no answer. In my presentation also I raised issues there. And I think if you ask this question to the people who are involved in framing the regulation, they also perhaps I feel will not have no answer. The fact which I said in the beginning in my presentation, the three aspect regulation, I highlighted a couple of aspects in the regulation there. The aspect of consumer is one of them also there. See, you have Indian consumer law, you have the SEBI, and you have the RBI kind of things there. Whole kind of regulation, they come out to protect the interests of the subscriber or depositor or regulation there. Yeah, after ultimately the entire regulation come out by SEBI or RBI or any regulator is to basic aim is to protect the subscriber or the consumer or the depositor or kind of thing. That's a basic purpose of that is there. That's a basic aim there. So therefore, that aspect will be there. That aspect is a fundamental thing which will have to be there. Without that, no regulation will have any meaning. It has to be protect the interests of a consumer. It has to benefit the consumer. It has to benefit the organization. That's a fundamental kind of a thing. But the issue is, it's all virtual. What all we talking about today, all is a real. But today we are talking about a virtual. We have to convert the virtual into reality also. How do we enforce, monitor, or regulate something which is virtual and distributed there, and to get into the real part? That's the issue. That's a great challenge. And I think that is the main kind of a thing, that things are being delayed, not only in India and worldwide. These aspects, why the whatever one of the speaker, Ms. Verma said it. I agree with that. I think these are very, very important issues. I don't have any answer. How do we do that? We cannot rewrite our consumer law, whatever we have. Whatever we cannot write many other acts also in this kind of a scenario. But unfortunately, this is the truth that a lot of destruction is going to happen, and we need to understand. The honorable member, Dr. Patnaik, also said these things. I fully agree with all of them. I think I really appreciate the way you have moderated, the way you have asked the questions. I compliment you and each of the panel speaker. I'm not taking away your role by thanking them, but I am also adding that each one of them has provided a good input, and they have provided good, honest discussion, what they feel they have come out. I really compliment all the speakers, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge. I am not in a position to give you a direct answer, but the limited answer is yes, it requires, it's a fundamental aspect. It has to be done in line with the existing kind of a regulation. But how to do that, I don't know.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai. And I'm sure that the concern that you raised is one that is in everyone's minds right now. And thank you very much for your very kind words. This has been a very fascinating discussion. Baroness Verma, just to take that point on the challenge to a conclusion, do you think that state governments' roles across the world need to be accelerated at this point, at a minimum, to ensure that there's awareness among consumers on what they're getting into when they invest into crypto assets, even if we are not reaching that stage of getting into the debate of whether it should be a legal tender or not?
Yeah, thank you very much. And forgive me, but I've literally got to get off this call to go on to another call, which I'm doing on diversity and inclusion. Very, very quickly, I agree fully with Dr. Rai. And first of all, thank you also for the wonderful way you've chaired everything, and to SKOCH board organising this really, really important debate. Because for me, it's the pace at what's happening with digital currencies is frightening. And my biggest fear is that whilst we have got so many other things that are occupying our minds, this is one space that really does need a focus from the whole world, because it is really going to be an easy solution for many, but it's also the most dangerous solution for many. And so I think for us to have honest debates, and this needs to be a debate point with every single economic forum, that exists. It needs to be there when you're talking with business. It needs to be there when you're talking with the finance world, and it needs to be there when you're talking with policymakers, regardless of the fact that it may not have a direct part of their remit. But I do feel really, really strongly, and I think Samir pointed it out right at the beginning, we don't know what we don't know, and therefore that vacuum easily gets placed by something that is incredibly dangerous, very difficult to then get out of your systems. And so you end up double regulating or triple regulating something that we should have thought about in the first place. And if on that, may I thank all the other panelists. It's been a brilliant afternoon with you all, but I do need to jump off. So forgive me for being slightly rude on that one and leaving you in the sort of midst. Thank you very much indeed.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Baroness Verma. It was a pleasure to have your views heard on this panel. And I think with that, we've completely run over time as well. And it has been an absolute privilege to moderate this absolutely brilliant panel. And thank you very much for all your views. I think there are a lot of key takeaways for us to learn from. And in terms of even Indian regulation of crypto assets going forward, I think the debate has only just begun, and influence of policies is very much the need of the hour, seeing the current legislation for crypto assets. But I'm sure that that'll be work that'll be taken forward by the SKOCH group as well, and they will be, as they always are, at the forefront of policy innovation in India. Thank you very much again to all the panelists, and we're very grateful for your time and for this fascinating discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you, Pranay. That was very well regulated. So lovely being with
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Kocha.
Thank you, Samir.